The Florida sun blazed over the Tallahassee courthouse, its white pillars gleaming under the midday heat. Inside Courtroom 4B, the air conditioning hummed softly, barely cutting through the tension thickening in the air. Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, sat poised at the plaintiff's table, her sharp blue eyes scanning the documents before her. At 58, she was a legal force, tough, brilliant, and unafraid of fight. She had prosecuted corrupt politicians, taken on Big Pharma, and argued before the Supreme Court. But today's case was personal. Across the room, the defense attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Richard Vance, smirked as he whispered to his client, a wealthy real estate mogul accused of bribing state officials. The case had dragged on for months, delayed by motions, missing evidence, and what Bondi suspected was judicial favoritism. And then there was Judge Harold R. Wilkins. Wilkins, a 65-year-old jurist with a reputation for being short-tempered, strode into the courtroom with an air of impatience. His black robe billowed behind him as he took his seat, glaring down at the attorneys like a displeased monarch. Bondi had clashed with Wilkins before. Years ago, when she was AG, she had investigated one of his close friends, a lobbyist later convicted of fraud. Wilkins had never forgiven her, and now, presiding over this case, he had the power to make her life difficult. Counselor Bondi, Wilkins drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. Are we finally ready to proceed, or do you need another delay to prepare your flimsy case? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Bondi clenched her jaw but kept her voice steady. No delays, Your Honor. The state is ready. Wilkins smirked. We'll see about that. The hearing began routinely. Motions, objections, the usual legal dance. But as Bondi stood to argue a critical point about withheld evidence, Wilkins cut her off. Ms. Bondi, he sneered, leaning forward, perhaps if you spent less time on cable news and more time actually reading the law, you'd understand how this works. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, a few muffled laughs from the defense table. Bondi froze. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public humiliation, a deliberate attempt to undermine her in front of the press, the jury, and her client. Her fingers tightened around her pen. But instead of firing back, she did something unexpected. She smiled. Your Honor, Bondi said smoothly. May we have a 5-minute recess? Wilkins, smug in his petty victory, waved a hand. 5 minutes. Don't waste my time. The moment she stepped into the hallway, Bondi pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Sheriff Daniels? It's Pam. We need to talk. Now, what Bondi knew, and what Wilkins had forgotten, was that she wasn't just any lawyer. She was Pam Bondi, the woman who had put mobsters, corrupt politicians, and white-collar criminals behind bars. And she had a long memory. Months earlier, an anonymous tip had crossed her desk. Judge Wilkins was dirty. At first, she dismissed it. Judges were investigated all the time, usually by disgruntled litigants. But something nagged at her, so she dug deeper. And what she found was explosive. Bank records, secret meetings, a $250,000 wire transfer from Shell Company linked to the very real estate mogul now sitting at the defense table. Wilkins had been bought. Bondi had quietly handed the evidence to the FBI, but they moved slowly, building their case. She had planned to wait until Wilkins insulted her in open court. Now it was personal. When court resumed, Wilkins was smirking, expecting Bondi to be rattled. Instead, she sat calmly, a faint smile playing on her lips. Ms. Bondi, Wilkins said mockingly, shall we proceed, or do you need another? Slam. The courtroom doors burst open. 4 armed sheriff's deputies marched in, their boots echoing on the marble floor. At their lead was Sheriff Hank Daniels, a grizzled lawman who had known Bondi for years. Judge Harold Wilkins, Daniels boomed, you're under arrest for bribery, obstruction of justice, and felony corruption. Silence. Then chaos. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Wilkins' face turned purple with rage. This is outrageous. On what evidence? Bondi stood, holding up a thick manila folder. On the evidence I just handed the sheriff. Wilkins was cuffed in his own courtroom, his robe stripped from him like a fallen king. The real estate mogul at the defense table turned pale, whispering frantically to his lawyer. Bondi didn't gloat. She simply turned to the stunned replacement judge and said, "Your Honor, the state moves for an immediate mistrial and a new trial date." Wilkins was later convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. The real estate mogul cut a deal, exposing an even wider corruption ring. And Bondi? She walked out of the courthouse that day to a crowd of cheering supporters and flashing cameras. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Bondi, was this revenge?" She paused, then smiled. "No, it's called justice."